Greetings, Dan Halligan with Kayenta Games, and I'm very excited to bring this video to you. I apologize, it's been a long time since I've done a video. 2020 and all of its international and commerce problems, and obviously COVID has bled over into 2021. The staggering backlog of games. If you think about 2020, games exploded in popularity because there were more and more people at home. In addition, I think there were probably a lot of Kickstarters that happened because there were prospective designers at home figuring, what the heck, I got a lot of time, let me go ahead and do a Kickstarter. So there was record numbers of games being kickstarted and produced. There was record interest in games, and there was significant decreased capacity in China for game manufacturing. And as I've mentioned in previous updates on Board Game Geek, every board game almost has a footprint in China for some aspect of production. In particular, if you get to plastic pieces, dice, wooden meeples, and other such components, that's almost guaranteed, even if the printing of boards or cards is being done, say, in Germany or in the US. If you've got a game like Obsession here, which has got a lot of bits, you're doing things in China. And so China being compromised in capacity at the time when games were taking off like never seen before, created a backlog so massive that Panda, who I can't stress enough has been just a marvelous business partner, stopped taking new customers and even new quotes from existing customers. They basically had to work through the massive backlog that they had as their capacity returned. In addition, 2021 has seen a transoceanic shipping crisis like you can't imagine. I'm not going to get into detail here, but costs have skyrocketed, and that's not an exaggeration. And there are many ports where container ships are just stacked up out in the ocean waiting to get access because of limited capacity at ports, either due to some new COVID spikes or manpower issues, or the fact that containers is another aspect of this whole problem, primarily manufactured in India, which is struggling with its COVID capacity. Anyway, long story short, it's been fun trying to get what you see before you to the people who want to get a hold of Obsession. Now, this is one of the rare communications because I didn't do a Kickstarter with the third printing of Obsession products. When I do a Kickstarter, I over-communicate. Here, it was just me as a businessman having games manufactured and trying to work through the logistic problems. But what I want you to see is that I do have what we call the mass production copies in front of me. They were just shipped to me. And I've gone through, I have not opened up the useful box, and this is what a lot of people want to know about. Look at my useful man there. The useful box, a strange creation we'll dive into. These games here are not new additions. The reprinting, so the Kickstarter in 2019 that fulfilled in the fall of 2020, those 20,000 games worldwide for all the various titles here, this didn't exist, sold out in about 7 months. Way beyond my expectations, and my treating the timeline for production as if everything were normal in the world is my fault, and one of the reasons that I'm about 4 or 5 months late getting this mass production copy on the table. I had hoped to do this back in the spring, but we adapt and do what we can do. The first thing I'm delighted to report, having opened and looked at the 4 titles here, is that everything is in beautiful order. I cannot tell you how terrifying it is when you get this in shrink wrap, because there's 20,000 games again of these 5 titles, and if something's wrong, it's almost impossible to fix. There's some assembly and packaging things that can be fixed. But I've been trying to perfect the game as I go along, and I apologize that that the games haven't been perfect in their first and second iteration. The second iteration was very close. The changes in these 4 titles are very, very minimal. And the changes that may upset some of the people who own these 4 titles already is what created the useful box, because I wanted to make sure that nobody who waited for me to get my act together to make everything perfect, the people who brought me to the dance, weren't taken care of as the newcomers to Obsession, and I welcome you, but they would be getting the little fixes that really the loyal people who've been with me since 2017 deserve. That's what the useful box is all about. So I want to go over some of the glorious things inside, and then we're going to open, you can see that's in shrink, we're going to open the useful box together. And every box has a designation, a designation that's unique so that it can be identified. This is not a new addition. There's no changes in gameplay in these 4 titles here. None at all. There's no changes in gameplay. There's some corrections, which I'm going to get into, and some refinements of rules, which I know I'm a little verbose with rules. And I tried to address some of those issues. But here I put 2.1e. So 2e is what a lot of you have, what most of you have, because that was the biggest printing. 2.1e just refers to the fact that this is the next printing. And the differences between 2 and 2.1 are very, very small indeed. And what are those differences? Let's look at them. So I open this up. I've gone ahead and put, this is not how it's packed. It was packed perfectly. Thank you, Panda. But I've gone ahead and put some of the changes that I want you to be aware of on top. So one of the significant changes is that, and I have the old stitching. So the old stitching on the bag, I mean, you can see it was, and I just pulled this, one of my last bags I have left from the old stitching. It was just it was not overlocked. I don't know anything about sewing, but I've been taught the lesson of overlocked. This thing just look. I did not plan this out to show you. And Panda acknowledged their mistake, and let me give a giant shout out for Panda. These corrected bags, which are corrected here and corrected here for the small bag, are contained in the useful box. And Panda donated all 10,000 of those bags. So this useful box, which is going to be $5 retail in the U.S., and my exclusive distributors are going to honor that price plus shipping. The corrected bags are in there. Panda supplied all those bags. So Panda's correcting their mistake, but there was a mistake, and for whatever reason, as you see these threads and such, they had to fix it, and they did. And we took a couple passes at it. But you can see the overlock stitching. This is not going to present the same problem. So everybody who owns Obsession first and second edition, when they get the useful box, they're going to get upgraded to this kind of bag, which is now in Obsession 2E. I wanted to make sure all player aids counted six player aids, because why? We have, as everyone knows, everyone loves these family boxes. Everybody wants to have a player aid in each and every box and not have to dig player aids out of one box for another. I had 4 in the original Obsession because it was a 4-player game, but I had 6 families. So the new edition has 6 player aids. Useful box corrects the missing player aids by adding 2 player aids to various types. The flow chart I felt needed to be improved. So there's a new improved flow chart that encompasses all the activities on a passing turn. I put 6 new passing flow charts in the useful box because everybody deserves to have the updated flow chart who owns the first and second edition. There was nothing really wrong with this, so there's just 2 in the useful box to get you up to 6. I created a new flowchart because I felt one of the things that was least clear in the rules was how a round flows. So I created a season flows. So I created a seasonal flowchart, which walks you through all the activities in a season. And on the back, I put some discussion of how guests and dismissing guests is done, because that's one of the most frequent questions I would get asked. So there's 24 of these, 6 copies of 4 different aids. And when you have the second edition and you get the useful box, that's going to make sure that you have 1 for each family box. So that's done. I did add some symbology to the round track. This is obviously not in the useful box, but that is one of the reasons that I created the new card, because the idea with the useful box is to keep the cost very low. And if I were to go ahead and create a box such that people would be able to get a new round track, the cost would skyrocket. So this here specifically explains the symbology and the flow that's been added here. This is just to remind people after courtship to discard an objective card and to cycle the first player marker. So that's the way I handled that in the useful box. That's been changed. Everything else pretty much the same. Packed beautifully. All components accounted for. I did do a little modification in the rule book. So one of the common complaints was how I accounted for the tiles in the components, and I fixed that. And the biggest complaint of all was the lack of information on how to handle objective cards. And I have a dedicated section that deals with seasons and objective cards in this book. And then I fixed a few typos, and everything looked great to me in the first reading. I'm going to read it more carefully later. So that's Obsession 2.1e. 5,000 of those are going to be put onto a ship probably within about 3 weeks and make their way to various destinations, and I'll have more on that later. Almost nothing changed in Wessex at all. It is designated as a 2.1e because it is a second printing of the second edition. And there's a little clarification on the fact that the solo opponents in here are actually for extended play, which I never explicitly stated in the past. But again, small changes. No changes happened to the promotional tiles. So the promotional tiles were fine, and those stay the same. Now, upstairs, downstairs had some significant changes, and none have anything to do with gameplay. The first change is that my first printing of upstairs, downstairs did not have instructions for what to do with all these odds and ends, this toolkit, if you will. Outside, once you get outside the upstairs, downstairs servants, everything else is sort of a toolkit. Well, this is 3 pages on what to do with each and every component that is in here. And I'm going to have this as both printer friendly and a regular PDF uploaded on Board Game Geek. So this is available to folks who might want to update their rule book. Obviously, I could not fit this rule book into the useful box, but it will be made available in a printer friendly format for people to reference. I also took a little bit of care to clarify some of the 5- and 6-player rules, as well as the different modes of play. But the primary change was the integration instructions were not neglected, and that was entirely my fault. That was not Panda's fault. We have the same thing. There's 2 player aids. There's 12 total, so I increased them to 6 and 6. So every family box is going to get the right count. Cards were fine. There was one mistake, which I fixed. Promotionals were perfect. No issue there. No issue here. Big miss on my part was a designation. If you see, sorry, knocked the light. If you see this U in the upper hand corner, that references the upstairs downstairs version of the objective cards, so that if you ever get these mixed up with the objective cards that come in the base game, you just need to focus in the upper right hand corner and you can separate out the two. I did not have a designation like that, so that was fixed. I didn't put those in there. Again, if I was going to keep this at $5, I started adding whole decks like this. Most people had come to an accommodation, and so I did not drop that objective card deck in there. Cooks. There's now 6 cooks instead of 5, so you can have 1 cook in the Howard box and then 5 cooks available for populating the servants for hire area. Otherwise, this did not change. I do have to shout out to Panda. They really did a nice job on the painting, very robust colors. And there is a cook over here to make sure that somebody's who's got the first or second edition can put a cook in their Howard family box. Properly stitched, over-stitched bag for the little guy. And that is pretty much it. Everything else was fairly fine there again. Now we get to the useful box. And we're going to open this together. This is live. A little bit nervous. So the useful box is 50% free product. Anything that corrects a mistake that I made in previous editions is in here at no charge. I did not add anything to that. I couldn't make the useful box free. It would lead to a commercial disaster. So I put in extra content in here with the intention of having only the charge for that extra content, excuse me, then the replacement materials would be contained in there at the same time. You got to admit that is a world-class funny cover. I think that's just great. I love him. So we start out, Panda providing replacement bags as an apology for the bags that were inferior in the second edition. In the first edition printing, the stitching was better than in the second edition printing. But you can get a backup set of bags if you get a first edition. There's your cook to make sure that she can be in the Howard box. Here's 6 tiles. One is a correction. In the housekeeper's room in the upstairs, downstairs expansion for the second edition, or for the last Kickstarter, for the first printing of that box, one side of this has a 0 for victory points, where this tile is a service tile, same on both sides, supposed to have 1 victory point on both sides. So I've replaced that, so you can have a tile that's not marked up on the other side or showing a 0. I have a new tile called a business room. And the business room is a fascinating idea I wanted to explore. So essentially, you have to put the Lord of the Manor on this tile. There's no service required. And you have to have 200 pounds available. Now, the Lord of the Manor has a favor of 200 pounds. So you're always going to have 200 pounds available. His favor then goes on this tile. He's investing in the tea trade. When he flips this over, there's 200 pounds on here. And then every turn you make a decision in step 2 on whether you want to add 200 pounds, which is the appreciation of the investment, or whether you want to take it off and use it that turn for purchasing stuff from the builder's market. You may say, wow, that could accumulate a lot of money. Yes, it can. But there's a real cost associated with it, which is that you're spending a whole turn and you're giving up money. If you do this later in the game, the accumulation is going to be less. If you do this earlier in the game to maximize the return on investment, you're going to sacrifice a whole turn in a season early on, which can have real opportunity cost consequences. So this is a fun tile. I've played with it. It flips back and forth. You could actually use it more than once. You could invest for half the game and then reinvest. Interesting tile. I think you're really going to like it. And the West Terrace, which is an original tile in Obsession, I felt was an underutilized tile because it was so difficult to use, demanding as it did 3 of the family on the backside. So what it does is once you play it the first time, it creates not a monument, but an ongoing dismissal action for the rest of the game. Now you might say that's incredibly powerful, cleaning out those cads, curmudgeons, and American heiresses. But remember, this is a level 5 tile. It's going to be played 3rd season and beyond. And it's going to be very productive to clean up your deck if you've got a lot of bad actors. But it's not overpowered because of the fact that it's limited really to the second half of the game. Anyway, those are new tiles. Well, this is a fixed tile. This is a new take on an old tile, which will replace the old tile. And that is a new tile altogether. I wanted to give a little more interest to the essentials category. So that looks great. So check that box. Here are the instructions and the what to do with everything that's inside. Now you might say that's not an awful lot. We got some tiles, we got a cook, and we got some replacement bags. What else do we have, Dan? Well, this deck here has got a lot of goodness in it. So let's take a look. So what does this deck have? All these player aids are to square the count at 6 so that your first or second edition, you're going to, once you integrate this, and I'm going to check the count because I'm always a little nervous that everything was followed, but I think everything's been perfect so far. But all these player aids are going to make sure you have 1 player aid for every family box. So that's the intention. That's a correction of a count issue. So now what have I added as far as new content? Well, the first thing I'm adding is a new solo opponent, and this solo opponent has been an online print and play solo opponent, but it is a higher level of AI. We call it the dynamic AI, and it more intelligently scavenges tiles. So everybody who's been playing the solo version, you're going to want to plug this in and then revisit some of those past opponents. I think you're going to find them more difficult because the AI guiding those opponents is going to more aggressively scavenge tiles of value. The original solo mode in the Obsession base game with the upstairs downstairs servants is overpowering and defeats the original solo mode too aggressively. And so I have here 6 new opponents, 3 for regular play and 3 for extended play. This is regular play, this is extended play. And these are really difficult. Well, they have 3 levels. There's a beginner, an immediate, intermediate, and a difficult. And let me tell you, the number one of all, which no one has beat, including me, I've called it, it's an old legend in England called the Lambton worm. Scary thing. And I chose to grab that, and I played this game. I probably played 30 games to try to get a game where I scored as high as I ever could. And then I tried to play it and beat it, and I've never beat it yet. So I had an absolute ridiculous score. And this here, I'm going to want to hear about anybody who can defeat the Lambton worm. So those are solo opponents. And what else do we have? Well, this was a card that needed to be fixed. It was a starter guest that had a 1 for a victory point. And this was a card that needed to be fixed with a spelling error. And this was a card that needed to be fixed for a grammatical error. Next are 3 new cards that are new content. The first is Lady Ethel Fairchild, who is the sister-in-law of Margaret Fairchild, lives with Margaret at Alderley Hall, and obviously is very close to her relations, Charles and Elizabeth, and she brings a special ability and a new favor. The sociable sister-in-law of Margaret Fairchild has formed an intimate bond with Elizabeth. So what she allows you to do when you play her for her favor, she allows you to look at the next concealed theme card in the upcoming courtship. Fascinating card. Then we have 2 new cards, and I was very much aware that I didn't have a lot of diversity in my original card decks. So I went mining through history because I wanted to get some real characters to sort of preserve the story. The first is Mr. William Darby, who went by the stage name of Pablo Funk. So let me bring that in. The famous circus owner, whose stage name is Pablo Funk, is, man, I'm reading through the camera, is a celebrated equestrian and showman. So this particular circus actually was in the 1860s in the Derbyshire area, and that is the only surviving photo of Mr. William Darby. So that, at least that I could find, and I searched really hard because it's not the very best photo, but I tried to tidy it up. Second, there was a fascinating historical character named Nathaniel Wells, who I write about in the instructions here. And so I created, Nathaniel Wells died right before the time of our game. So I decided to create a fictional descendant of Nathaniel Wells, Nathaniel Wells being a historical character. And I include her, and this is Miss Prudence Baker, an accomplished landscape artist, the great-granddaughter of Nathaniel Wells, comes to the Peak District to paint. So it's a couple new cards that we can add to our collection. And that is the useful box, and I'm looking at it now and I can say I'm very excited. Everything is here and accounted for, and there will be more details on the useful box coming up in future announcements over the next 3 to 4 weeks as the games make their way to getting assembled and on the boat.